Yay, we made it to the last one. I am so proud of you if you're watching all of these videos because they're long and they certainly take a long time to make as well. So I understand. And they can be kind of boring. So I'm trying to be excited. Okay, so suppose the basketball player has the ability to make 75% of her free throws. Which one represents 100 sets and which one represents 100 sets of 50 and which one represents 100 sets of 200? So that means that both of these dot plots on the left and the right have 100 dots. So it's not 50 dots versus 200 dots. It's 100 versus 100. Each of them have 100 dots. However, one of the dot plots represents like 50 free throws and one of like 50 free throw simulations. So thinking back to that spinner where we had a listed out of 34 and that was one simulation. This is like now instead of 34, there's 50 and that's one simulation. And then we have 100 sets of 200 and that's one simulation. So in this case, it says, what is the middle value of each distribution? Explain why that's not surprising. So if I'm looking for the middle, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. It's probably around there, and even this one looks like around there. Maybe I have some outliers a little bit to the left and the right, but not so much that it skews my data. So I would think that the middle of the distribution is around 75%. I'm going to say approximately 75%, because in stat, you never want to say something really concretely because you could be wrong. Like it could be 75.2%. So I'm not going to say this is 75%. I'm going to say it's approximately 75%. In that way, I'm right. So it's approximately 75%. I'm not surprised because my ability is 75. So it's what I would expect to happen. So I'm not surprised because the ability was 75. So it's what I would expect to happen. Okay, if the middle was like 50, that would be weird, right? Because we think that it's going to be 75. Again, 100 is a pretty large sample size. All right, so which distribution is the one showing the results of 50 and which one is the results of 200? So that has to do with the law of large numbers. So the law of large numbers says that the more performances that I see, so more performances is closer and closer and closer to the true ability. Okay, which means as I introduce more and more samples, I should get closer and closer and closer and closer to a certain number. So if I'm comparing these two dot plots, this one on the left goes from like 64 to let's say 92. Okay, that's an approximate answer again. So 64 to 92, but this one goes from like 68 to 84. So comparing those two, the one on the right is much closer together, which means that it's more concentrated. Also, the dots are more concentrated. They're not as spread out. So the one on the right represents the 200 free throws. Because the data is closer together, which means I have more samples, so it's like getting closer and closer and closer to what the actual ability is. And that also means that the one on the left is the one that represents 50 free throws because there's not as much data, meaning I have more room for variability. Variability means that it's like all over the place. It's not necessarily consistent in one place because I am not looking at as many samples. So the more numbers that you have, I'm going to write this up top, the more numbers or the more samples, the closer you get to the ability. So the more samples that I look at, like the 200, notice that the data is getting closer together.